Hello, you are listening to the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer and Amazon #1 best-selling author. You can find out more about me and my work at catherinecarrigan.com and unlimitedenergynow.com. While you're there, definitely sign up for my newsletter so you can learn even more about how you can heal yourself naturally. Now, our guest today is the one and only Ani Anderson. Ani Anderson is an author of the wonderful book, Find Your Soul's Agenda. We did an earlier interview about that fabulous book here on the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio. And she's also CEO of New Health Inc. You can find out more about Ani Anderson and her wonderful work at her website, motivationbeyondmeasure.com. Welcome, Ani Anderson.
Thank you so much for having me. I've really been looking forward to this conversation with you today.
Awesome. Now, we're going to be talking today about motivation. And, you know, Ani Anderson, you and I both know that different people have different ideas about motivation and what is motivation. In your view, what actually is motivation?
Yeah, for me, it's about our reason for moving. And I'm so glad that you brought up that different people have different concepts about this, because I think that the more popular concepts are concepts that can keep people, especially who are on a healing journey, stuck or feeling like they're not doing something right. And so I like to think about motivation as our reason for moving, because in that way we can talk about something that everyone has. Everyone has a reason for moving.
So it's basically our why, right? Why you want to get better, why you want to improve, right?
Yeah, exactly. And a little bit different, I think, conceptually from purpose is we might think that our purpose is something that encompasses all areas of our life, where our motivation can shift in circumstances or, from time to time. And I think it can be helpful to think about it like that sometimes.
Okay, it's our reason why, right?
Yeah.
I have to tell a very funny story about this, since you put it this way. So years ago, I was on a train in England, and I was on my way to a new school, and I didn't know anyone, and I was wearing this uniform, which at the time I just thought was super ugly. And so I'm on a train, all the other little girls knew each other. I didn't know anybody. And I was sitting there next to a man, and he was very intensely reading this pamphlet. And I didn't know what he was reading. And but when he got off the train at his stop, he gave me the pamphlet. And the pamphlet was called The Reason Why. The Reason Why. And I carried that pamphlet around with me for decades. The Reason Why. So when we're talking about motivation, again, we're talking about the reason why we do what we do.
Yeah. What a great story. That man was like a messenger.
He was. I kept this pamphlet in a cigar box for decades. Now, of course, one of the things that affects all of us is stress. And, we can talk about what causes stress and how we deal with stress. But Ani Anderson, CEO of New Health Inc., why might some of the stress that people are feeling actually be resistance to change?
Yeah. So, change comes all the time. It's that cliche, right? It's the only constant. And it comes both from internal, like I want to move into a new thing. It also comes external all the time. And there are aspects of our nervous system and our physiology that want to stay the same. They function on staying the same. We learn how to do things, and our bodies accommodate to how things are done. And then our nervous system wants to keep going. But with all of this change being the constant, there actually needs to be, in order for us to not experience so much stress, resiliency in our system to be able to accommodate transformation in any moment. I'm sure you find that in your own work as well, right? Like that change resistance can really be difficult for folks to deal with.
Yes. Now there is a fabulous book that I'm going to point out for our audience. It was written years ago by a man named James Prochaska. And in this book, he talks about the 5 stages of change. So what are the 5 stages of change? The first stage is pre-contemplation. So when you're in pre-contemplation, the cons of changing outweigh the pros. So it's like, maybe you want to lose weight, but I'm absolutely not going to stop eating gummy bears under any circumstances. And I don't like going to the gym and, all the other, reasons why again, motivation, reasons why you don't want to change. Then the second stage of change is contemplation. And in contemplation, the pros and the cons of changing are about equal. So it's like, I really would like to be slimmer. It would be so fun to have a new pair of jeans that look awesome, and, maybe I could eat fewer gummy bears. And I use that because I love gummy bears.
I was wondering.
And then in the third stage of change is actually planning. So you have to have a plan. So for example, when I do medical intuitive readings, basically part of what I do is create an optimal health plan. What's the ideal environment, ideal nutrition for you, ideal supplements? What are the supportive therapies that you need? What's the exercise that's going to work best for you? And so a plan and coming up with a plan that will work just for you is part of change. And then the fourth stage of change is actually action. And so, which is where you're doing it. You're like, okay, I'm going to eat less gummy bears. I'm going to walk every day. I have my plan, and then you're doing it. And then the final stage of change is maintaining. It's like, okay, I'm eating fewer gummy bears. I'm walking regularly. I'm working on my attitude, and I'm doing there. So there
are so many things I like about what you said. I mean, first of all, when we understand the stages of change, all of a sudden, you said in the beginning, we're in that pre-contemplative state, I think you called it.
Yeah.
Like we're weighing the pros and cons. And so oftentimes people really get on themselves and they thwart their progress rather than recognizing I'm in a natural state right now where I am really weighing the pros and cons. I'm not sure. I might not want to move. And there's so much health in that. There's so much empowerment in realizing that we're in a state of natural change process rather than saying, oh man, I just can't do it. Oh, I'm not motivated. That's one of the things, when I hear people say, that's one of the reasons why I like to talk about, wait a minute, everybody has motivation, so that we stop telling ourselves those things because they're a hard stop, and then we won't move forward to get to the place where we're creating a plan, to allow ourselves to have a plan created just for us so that we can thrive and put ourselves in those environments where we're really going to make a meaningful impact on our own lives.
Yeah, well, part of what I do as a medical intuitive healer is I figure out what stage of change are you actually in. And the reason that's critical is because, for example, let's take stopping smoking. Well, you could give somebody who's in pre-contemplation the best possible plan for them to stop smoking, but it won't work because they're in pre-contemplation. So different techniques work depending on what stage of change you're in. But going back to what you're talking about what is motivation, your reason why, you can change very, very quickly, given the right circumstances. So I'll give an example. So years ago, my professor from Brown, I went to Brown University. So he was like the father I always wanted and never had. He had smoked cigarettes for decades. He went to the doctor. He was diagnosed with lung cancer. He came home, put the cigarettes down, and never smoked another cigarette in the rest of his life. Now, hopefully, what it takes you to change isn't a cancer diagnosis. We don't want that for you, right?
Exactly. So many people wait until things are really pressing. Right. So one of the things that's really striking to me as I'm listening to your stories about what you do with your clients is it's really important as a practitioner to really do our due diligence with people, right? So one of the I have my background in rehabilitation therapeutics, but now our company does a lot of training for coaches. And in the coaching industry, you don't have to have any specialized training to be a coach, but I believe that it's incumbent upon each of us to really do our due diligence and learn about the theories and the processes that are going to help us to understand the processes naturally that are going on within our clients so that we can really meet them with expertise, like you're doing with understanding where your clients are in the state of change.
Absolutely. Now, Ani Anderson, author of Find Your Soul's Addenda, do people resist change more when the change is opposed by something or someone outside of themselves?
I think they do. And I think that it's really helpful to help people to really find their internal motivation. I mean, the secret, I'll laugh, is that I think all motivation is really internal, but to to help people to tap into why things matter to them, right? I mean, it's like anything. If you're trying to convince somebody, it doesn't really work. But when you help to understand another person and you help to see what's in it for them, we do get this experience of, I'm going to say buy-in, even though it's not the maybe the, I don't like to describe it necessarily like that, but we understand what I'm talking about when I say it like that. So if we can get buy-in, and sometimes that requires more listening, sometimes it requires more education, more understanding. But when we really understand a person and help them to get buy-in, then yes, I do believe that it's easier for somebody to embrace a change because they feel like it matters to them.
Right. They find their own reason why to do what's asked for them. Right.
Exactly.
And one of the things that comes to mind for me is teenagers, right? Because again, normal human development, you start out, you're dependent, you're a little baby. Somebody has to feed you and change your diapers and tell you not to, cross the road without looking. And then when people become teenagers, they go into independence. And part of what you're doing in independence is you're thinking for yourself. You're figuring out what is important to you. What are my motivations? What are my values? And then as you progress, you can go into interdependence, which is where you're able to have healthy partnerships and have healthy relationships. And then as you age again, a lot of people, their 60s, 70s, and 80s are going into independence. And then finally, that last stage where they're unhealthy and they've lost their independence, they're into dependence. But going back to that teenage state, and there's rules imposed from the outside, and then there's this rebellion phase. Like,
that's right.
No way, Jose.
Don't tell me what to do.
Tell me what to do, right? But
Yeah.
I think that part of that is, even those rules that are imposed from the outside, that's when people are really going into themselves and figuring out, well, how do I want to live my life?
Exactly. I think that a lot of us didn't, for me too, didn't experience necessarily healthy teenage growth. And so we drag those things along with us that we didn't really have a healthy experience with when we were growing up. And so, for example, I needed to really be in a place in my adult life where I was able to rebel, and I needed to learn to say no, or I can do it, or I don't want to. And I needed to go through that as a grown-up because I didn't experience that as a teenager. It's one of my favorite things to do with a client, probably because I went through it too, to really help them to reclaim different aspects of their life that they really didn't, meet those developmental stages. And the teenage one is one of my favorites. Of course, I'm smiling too because I live with 3 teenagers, so I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I remember when I went to college, my mother had always made a healthy dinner. And when I went to college, I was like, I am eating cookies and ice cream for dinner every night.
Me too.
Because I can.
That's right.
And
I did too.
and it's so funny because I look back at that, and my chocolate chip cookie and my ice cream, and in a way that was sort of a normal, healthy development, because you do that for a while and it's like, I don't feel very good, and my
Right?
jeans are getting tight, and what was I thinking?
Yeah, you figure it out, right? But you figure it out because you decided to, which is
Exactly,
different.
because you decided to.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's quite funny about how all that works,
It is. It
Right.
is. And I think that's one of the detriments of how motivation is perceived and brought about by so many people. We get out there and we tell people, go do it, go do whatever you want. And, get the energy up, get the energy up. But then once they're not in front of somebody who's going, rah, 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 they can't get themselves to do it. We're so used to being, beaten down, needing to follow the rules, needing to stay in a box, keeping ourselves small, that it's very difficult for people to leave conversations where we say rah, 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 and be able to get themselves to do things. We didn't really tap into what it matters to them. And for some people, the why is really tender and it's vulnerable. And that's important. Motivation isn't just about going, yeah, motivation sometimes is intertwined with any one of the emotions, and anger and love and compassion or whatever. So it can be a really tender, vulnerable experience for people. I think that holding space for a person, for me, holding space for a person to really tap into why they want to move and be in a totally non-judgmental place about that and really listen is a real gift for someone.
Right. Now, Ani Anderson, so somebody's listening to this, and my observation as a medical intuitive healer is the bigger the change you need or want to make, the bigger your why needs to be.
Yeah.
Right.
Definitely.
So for example, in the example that I gave of my professor, once he was diagnosed with cancer, with lung cancer, he had a really big why on why he needed to stop smoking cigarettes.
Yep.
So how can we find our why even when there's not a big change that's required?
Yeah. One of the things we can do is we can really tap in and see what brings out emotion for us and any emotion for us. So we might look at what makes us angry or what makes us sad or what brings us joy. I think a lot of times when we talk about motivation, people are looking in a very positive only light. Like we've got to look at just what makes us excited. I went through a period of my own life where people kept asking me, what makes you excited? And I didn't know. I couldn't tap into it. So what really touches your heart or makes you angry? What is it that really stimulates a strong emotion? And I think that's going to open a door for folks.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times it's stuff that's happening around us and we don't notice it. So if you just start to ask yourself the question, I wonder what it is that really brings out strong emotion for me, the next thing you know, you're going to be yelling at the television or something and go, oh, hang on, there must be something in there. There must be something in there for me to become aware of.
Yes. Okay. So, what I find as a medical intuitive healer is one of the things that helps people get motivated is by identifying their values. Now, what do I mean by values? So each and every one of us have things that we value in life. So if you're listening, for example, to the Natural Healing Show, there must be part of you that values being healthy, right? Or values being healthy in a natural way without taking a lot of drugs or surgery. Not that sometimes we have to take drugs or surgery, but what can we do naturally to be healthy? So one of the things, an exercise that I get a lot of my clients to do is to write down 100 things that you value in life. And so this could be, I value having a clean house, or I value my children having a good education, or I value being financially free, or I value being debt free, or, I value having a healthy body, or I value peace of mind. So these are examples. So, and frequently people can easily rattle off 30 things they value. I value my family. I value living in a free country. But when you keep going to 100, then you really start to see some commonalities. And then once you get this 100, then you drill it down to 10 things that you value the most. Like, I really value honesty, right? Is it a good value, right? Or something that a lot of people value. I value honesty and integrity. And so when you really value honesty and integrity, that's how you want to be with everyone. And that's how you want everybody to be with you. So you come up with these values, and especially your top 10 most dearly held values. And often those are the motivations. So for example, those are the values that are going to drive you to help you find your inner why. So for example, let's say you're listening to this and you go, gosh, what I realize is that I really value my family. Well, when you really value your family, then you're going to want to be the best you that you can be for your family. So you're going to want to eat well and get enough rest so that you can be a good mother or father or parent or, so on. And you're going to want to do what it takes in business so that you can provide for your family, right?
Yeah, that 100 thing is so important. You're so right. People will write down 20, 15, 30 and really not dig deep enough. And it sounds like when you say 100, it sounds like, what? I can't possibly do that. That is way too much, but it actually requires us going beyond our usual thinking to really dig in there and get the answers. Such a great exercise.
Now, Ani Anderson, how can stress reduction, why is stress reduction often not enough to help people deal with resistance to change?
Well, a lot of the stress reduction tactics that we use, as lovely as they are, by the way, and I love so many of them, please don't get me wrong, but we need to really look at where core issues are coming from so that we can make true and complete transformation. So, for example, we might go to a yoga class and we feel better for an hour and then we go home and the stressors just come back. Or we do a meditation or some deep breathing, or we have lavender or whatever. There are so many different ways to change our state and to feel better in the moment. But we also really need to look at what patterns we are operating from physically, mentally, emotionally, all of that stuff, so that we can help identify from the core. It's kind of like what you were saying with that. We really need a deep, meaningful why. We really need to look deeply within ourselves to make sure that we're cleaning up any core patterns of wounding, of coming from a place where I don't feel lovable or I don't feel worthy or something like that, so that we make sure that we're coming from a really healed and whole place.
How can we stay motivated during change? So let's say you're like, okay, I really need to lose the weight. I'm not going to eat as many gummy bears. Maybe I can't go for a walk every day, but I can maybe walk 5 days a week. How can you maintain a strong motivation to keep going?
I'm sure you're going to have a lot of suggestions about this too. And I think there's a lot of things we can do. One of the things is to have support, right? So hiring people like yourself who help to not just hold you accountable. I don't love that term, but to really be there for you, to really help you with the path so that you have somebody to talk to and not somebody who's just going to get lost in your story about why you should stay the same, or, like a person who's really your champion to help you. I also am going to say something that's a little bit counterintuitive to what I just said, but some of those things like the meditation and the yoga and those moment to moment techniques that we can use in a moment to bring ourselves back can really be helpful, because we can spin out on the stress when we allow ourselves to it's like a snowball effect. But when we can catch ourselves in an early moment of, oh my goodness, my mind is rolling. Oh my goodness, my heart's starting to pound a little bit faster than I'd like, starting to get nervous or anxious. When we can bring ourselves back with some of those tools, it can be really helpful to keep ourselves on the path.
Yeah, great observations, Ani Anderson. And what I find, and this is as myself, is that sometimes your motivation is only as good as your self-care. So what do I mean by that? So let's say you're trying to lose weight, but you don't get enough sleep. Well, when you're tired and grumpy, what do? You self-medicate. You eat more gummy bears because you're feeling sorry for yourself about how tired and miserable you are, right?
Yeah.
So maintaining that self-care and keeping your own energy up, like I talk about in my book, Unlimited Energy Now, when your energy is good, then your motivation stays more consistent.
I love that you said the word consistent, because I think a lot of people think that being motivated means being on high all the time. And one of the things I'm appreciating about this conversation is you and I can talk about motivation. And here we are having a pretty balanced, pretty neutral kind of conversation. And for me, in my experience, and when I work with my clients, that's really a sustainable place of motivation. Being on high isn't a sustainable place. There are times when we're, running down the street, and there's times when we're sleeping. There's day and there's night, there's up and there's down. And we need to embrace both to really come from a place of balance and wholeness.
Great observation. Now, when I'm doing my healing work, I'll do a healing, and let's say somebody has a goal, like to lose weight or to make more money. Those are some basic goals that people have. Well, one of the things that I do as a medical intuitive healer is I will identify the emotion or emotions that are actually holding your motivation back, right? And I start with the Chinese 5 elements: fire, earth, metal, water, wood. Gallbladder. I'm really resentful because everyone else seems to have it easy, but I don't. So I find the emotion, or stomach meridian. I'm dissatisfied with where I'm at. I want more in my life, right? Or, it may be lung meridian, which is low self-esteem. Like, I don't feel good about myself the way that I am. But I'm identifying what are the emotions that are holding you back. And then we'll do healing work to clear that. Another thing that I'll do is I find the roles that you're playing that are holding you back. So I love that you talked about playing small. So a lot of people, there's a lot of ways that we can play small. And when you play small, it's obvious because you're trying to stay safe, right?
Yeah.
So for example, a lot of people, they may have worked at their job for like 15 years, but they're still acting like an amateur, right? And they're playing the role of amateur. They're not owning their mastery. Right? So what are the roles that are holding you back?
Absolutely. I love that you brought up the 5 element theory. I mean, I know a lot of reasons why you and I resonate, but I think that's another one that I didn't know. Using the 5 elements really helps you, again, to understand nature. When we understand nature, we understand so much more about ourselves. It helps us to really have an understanding of the natural cycle, like you were talking about with fire and earth and metal. Like, all of these things are natural. All of these things are okay. It helps us to come into so much more acceptance about where we are. I love that you talked about acknowledging and being curious about identifying the emotions that are holding us back, because so often we don't want to look in that direction. We want to push that down. We don't want to acknowledge that. But the things that we disallow, the things that we're not allowing to be a part of our experience that are happening anyway, they're like gremlins tapping on our shoulder, they're there. We need to really acknowledge and allow those things so we can move forward cleanly.
Absolutely. And if you don't identify, my experience from 28 years in full-time experience in natural healing is if you don't, number one, identify the emotions that are holding you back and clear them, then you're going to stay stuck.
Exactly. And wonder why you're still there.
Yeah. And emotions can shut down literally any process in the body.
They're powerful. They're so powerful. And we can use them.
Now, Ani Anderson, how are motivation and stress similar neurologically?
Oh, this is really interesting. I think, physiologically, stress and motivation are basically experienced the same in the body, except for motivation has this element of social acceptance that goes with it. And stress doesn't. So if I'm feeling a certain way, and I might label that stress, but I see that you're accepting where I'm at and you're listening, you're present with me, then all of a sudden I can use that towards my why, right? My motivation. But if I'm experiencing that you're not on the same page as me, or you might be judging me, or you're not accepting where I'm at, then that will cause stress in my nervous system. So it's actually the same processes, but it's experienced differently by how we perceive that we're being perceived.
Interesting. Now, Annie Anderson, how come trying to be motivated can make, or trying to be motivating can make other people less motivated?
Oh, I love talking about this. And I think this is something you'll resonate with too. When we are trying to motivate someone else and kind of like drag it out of them, then we're actually putting ourselves in a place of power and putting them in a disempowered place. I'm sure you do this with your clients as well. I'm always looking for how I can put my client into an empowered place. And that doesn't mean that I'm in a disempowered place. It's almost like a shared power or a co-collaborative power place where everybody gets to be in power. But I think a lot of times when we talk about motivating people, we're putting ourselves or the leader or whomever in a power position. We're putting them on a pedestal, which isn't balanced. And then that disempowers other people. So it's really, it's possible to stimulate people's internal motivations and their why that puts them in an empowered place and allows me to then be in an empowered place within myself as well. I guess, from a leadership perspective, I like to think of it like everybody gets to be a self-leader. I think the old concept of leadership where if somebody is a leader and they have followers, I think that's going by the wayside. I just don't think it works anymore. I think we're even seeing this in the healthcare space. It's depleting for healthcare workers to be put in the expert position where everybody's going, tell me the answer. Everybody, I think, wants to be more empowered. The patients want to be more empowered and the practitioners want to be more empowered. The leaders want people to be more empowered and people want to be more empowered. So it's this kind of shared power kind of thing. And in order to do that, we need to be able to stimulate people's internal motivation.
Great observations. Now, one of the things that we know here at the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio is that your environment is the most powerful factor.
Definitely.
Okay, and we know that from feng shui. A great example is, let's say you want to stop drinking. Well, if you continue to go to the pub and hang out with your friends who drink every night, then you're going to do what, when in Rome, do what the Romans do.
Yep.
And so why do you think, Ani Anderson, that putting yourself in the right group, so let's say you go, all right, I really am drinking too much and I need to go to AA or NA, or any of these other groups that are helpful. So Ani Anderson, why do you think that putting yourself in the right group of people helps with our motivation?
Well, I think it goes back to that idea that our physiology is experiencing stress and motivation in the same or very similar way. And so if we want to stop drinking, but we're going to the bar and we say to our buddies at the bar, I'm not going to drink anymore, we're not going to get that social approval. And so it's going to feel like stress. And eventually the stress is going to weigh us down and we just can't overcome that inertia. Whereas if we put ourselves in an environment where we're getting social approval, we'll start to experience that what could be perceived as stress, as excitement, as motivation, as movement towards a new direction. So that's one of the reasons why that social approval thing is a really big deal.
Absolutely. What I find as a medical intuitive healer is that if you want to be healthier, hang out with other people who are doing that. And it's not just that they're going to share their recipes, or if you go to the gym, they're going to show you how to do a deadlift properly. It's a mindset, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah, that's so funny about sharing recipes, because that's kind of like what we think sometimes. Oh, I'll hang out with different people who do things healthier so I can get better recipes. I mean, sure. And when we hang out with people who have an expanded frame of reference, who just think differently than we do, experience the world differently than we do, it's infectious in a good way to be with people like that. I mean, similar, I'll use myself as an example. I'm in a community of people right now where one of the leaders is just, he thinks so differently than other people that I've been around. It's been very inspiring for me. And so I watch how he's thinking, and I think for myself, am I thinking like that? Am I really expanding my mind to think how I could do things differently? And I credit that to being in community with him. We're all connected, right? So it's like this wonderful vibe, energy, vibration, really, that we get to be around a new vibration when we put ourselves in those new environments.
Yeah. So if you want to be happier and healthier, then start by looking around you and ask yourself, are the people I'm around happy and healthy? And if they're not, then one of the most powerful things that you can do is not necessarily go buy a supplement, but change the people who surround you, for sure.
Yeah. What a huge difference it makes for so many people. It's such a game changer. I love doing group coaching programs or working with companies where we're working with a group of individuals and we really start to shape the culture, you know? And then people can go back into their own lives and think, how do I need to change my own culture at home if I do? And that's really super empowering and powerful for people. I think that's one of the ways that as leaders or in work, we can do really good work at work and help people to take those wonderful, empowering ways of being home. That is really healthy.
For sure. Now, Annie Anderson, why do you say that everyone is already motivated?
I think when we don't say that, then we're leaving people out, and we give people the opportunity to say, she must be talking about me. And we close the door on people. I think it's incumbent upon leaders, experts, even people who don't consider themselves leaders, like I was saying, healthcare practitioners, holistic practitioners, anybody who does people work, to leave the door open for people's capacity in any moment. So I really love to talk. We were talking in the beginning too about what motivation is, and that everybody is motivated. We just have to find out what your why or whys are so that we can help you to get to the goals that you want to achieve. If we don't say that, then we're leaving the door open for people to say, they must be talking about me, I can't do it.
Yeah. And, the example that I'm going to give, and maybe you'll laugh if you're listening to this. Let's say you're listening and you go, I really am a couch potato. And my inner couch potato is very, very comfortable being a couch potato. Well, part of what motivates you is being comfortable. So when you realize that, okay, I'm owning my inner couch potato, then one of the things you have to ask yourself, I find as a medical intuitive healer, is how can I keep my change comfortable? And one of the things that I find as a medical intuitive healer, and this is interesting, I'm going to go back to the brain. So you have a brain, you've heard of it, it's in your head. And we all have in the brain amygdala, and they're basically the survival centers of the brain. So if somebody tries to go in and tries to change you through force, it usually does not work. But when you bypass the survival centers of the brain, when you make the change so subtle and so easy and so comfortable, it's like, I'm safe. I'm still feeling like a couch potato. I'm still pretty comfortable while I'm walking gently down the street.
Exactly. That's such a great example. And I'm so glad you brought it up. One of my favorite client stories, I was teaching a coaching program. And so teaching people how to be coaches, right? And in the session, I was encouraging one of the students to watch more television. And after we got off, it was funny because after we got off the call, I got a call from one of the students and she said, I just don't understand why you were telling her to watch TV. And I had a good joke about it with her, because the fact was that the person loved watching TV and she kept shaming herself around it. And I was encouraging her, see if you can watch television, really give yourself an acceptance level while you're watching TV to enjoy it. What if you could sit there and enjoy it? And then we were able to work from that into a place where she was able to create the change that she wanted. Like you said, from a place of more comfort. It doesn't always have to be so jarring and horrible. We talk about how we have to push through our fears and push through it. But what I have seen so many times when people try to go about that and they don't want to, is they end up getting to the end where maybe they meet their goal, maybe they don't. But if they do, they've broken something along the way. Either they're exhausted, or they just don't really appreciate the goal once they're even there, or they've broken relationships or something along the way. There's a gentler way to go about it, like you were describing with the couch potato scenario.
Yes. And, my observation also from 28 years full-time experience in natural healing is that loving yourself and accepting yourself just the way you are actually makes it easier to change. So, so I've done this radio show for a while, and years ago, I interviewed this gentleman who I will not name, and his expertise is helping people stop binging. And he said, you fat cow, stop eating that gallon of ice cream. And I remember just almost feeling shocked and appalled, because it's like, well, maybe part of what you need to do is accept that part of yourself that wants to eat the ice cream, but how can we make peace with that part, right?
Exactly. It brings us back to the roots of healing, wholeness. How do we bring wholeness to our experience? Because that's the magic portal to really creating healing.
Yes. And by loving yourself and accepting all parts of yourself, including the uncomfortable parts, then what I find is that you can make change that's sustainable.
Exactly.
So for a lot of people, like never eating ice cream again, that may not be a sustainable goal. Or it may not even be a goal that they really want to own.
Yeah, like, well, people will say things to me and I'll say, why are you even saying that? I don't want to watch television ever again. Why? Where is that coming from? Like, what's your motivation for saying that? We have to dig deeper.
Yeah. So loving yourself, accepting all parts of yourself, then you can create even plans. It's like, this is a sustainable plan.
Yeah. And include all the parts of yourself. Exactly. And that's what creates sustainable change.
So Ani Anderson, why do you feel it is better for leaders, coaches, therapists, and managers to tap into people's inner motivation rather than being inspiring?
Again, I think this comes back to this idea that I have to be the person to move you, to move somebody else. And I think, I've done this myself. We can get on ego trips, about being the helper or being the one who made the change. But if we can put that to the side and really help people to find their own motivation, their power and empowerment, then it really does create more energy for everybody. But we have to get out of our own way and be willing to leave those like expert stances or, the way we think we need to be as a leader. It takes a lot of courage, I think, to create that new way of being where everybody gets to be empowered.
Great observation. And what I find is that when we're in our ego self, right, that you're basically in an aspect of the mind. And the way that I look as a medical intuitive healer is the most powerful part of all of us is at our soul level. And you wrote a wonderful book, Find Your Soul's Agenda. And so when you're in that ego, there's even techniques that I teach where you set your shadow aside, and shadow is part of the aspect of the ego. And ego always wants to be right, glamorous, have everything be easy, and so on. But as a medical intuitive healer, part of what I feel is my job is to show up and get out of the way and allow my soul to connect with that person's soul and understand what is their process. What needs to shine forth in this moment.
Exactly. I think from a company standpoint, we're really seeing a shift in successful companies where we're coming from a place where we used to come from a place where everybody had to get on board with the company mission. And if you weren't on board with the company mission, forget about it. Whereas now it's more of a conversation that I'm seeing starting to surface, which is really lovely, about how you can really have your mission and how we can co-support, right? So that you're helping the company mission, but I'm also helping your mission. I think that's one of the reasons why we're seeing things like, mental wellness entering into the workspace and, different aspects where we're really embracing more of the human being in the work environment. I think this is an aspiration, but I also see that we're getting there. We're starting to really get there.
You've been listening to the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer, Amazon #1 bestselling author. You can find out more about me and my work at catherinecarrigan.com and unlimitedenergynow.com. While you're there, definitely sign up for my newsletter so you can learn even more about how you can heal yourself naturally. Our guest today has been the very gifted Ani Anderson, author of the wonderful book, Find Your Soul's Agenda, and CEO of New Health, Inc. You can find out more about Ani Anderson and her wonderful work at her website, motivationbeyondmeasure.com. And remember, you already are motivated. It's really just a question of tuning in to yourself at the soul level and finding what inspires you. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.